He's got some interesting takes on health, so I'm excited to talk to him. Please welcome back author Christian Yardanov. How are you, buddy?
Sam, I'm great, man. So good to see you guys.
I feel like I butchered your last name right there.
You
Did I
did,
get it?
yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
Yardanov. I got it right, right? Come on, dude.
No, that's not what you said.
Dude, it's
What'd I
close.
say?
It's close
I
enough,
couldn't
dude.
even repeat it. What you said. I was
Shut
like,
up, Johnny.
It's like you've had enough.
You're
Like you've had enough.
Yeah, there we go, buddy. I think I got right. So, Christian, it's been a while, buddy. How are you?
I'm good, man. I am excited to share with you some of the stuff. By the way, since we last spoke about 18 months ago, a lot of this stuff I learned in this sort of year and a half. So I'm just as sort of messed up by it, at least initially, as you and some of your listeners may be. And trigger warning for this episode, because we have a lot of things that we think are healthy.
I know I'm going to get some calls from people. That's all I'm going to say. I know I'm going to get some calls from people going, what the hell is this guy talking about? What is he talking about? This is crazy. So I'm excited. So, Christian, before we get into it, for those who may not be familiar with your last appearance, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where our listeners can find you?
Yeah, so I am a functional health practitioner, author. I've written 2 books. My first book was on autism. I've worked with autistic kids and their parents to help them both get healthier. But I kind of, in 2018, I got interested in health because my family members around me were really deteriorating in health. And I did a lot of like alcohol and drugs in my 20s. So I thought I was screwed. I was going to end up really in a bad way in my 40s, 50s, 60s. So I went on a massive sort of health journey to figure out some stuff, and I got into kind of the biohacking stuff. So I was doing all this low carb, keto, ice bath stuff back in 2018, and I always wanted to work with biohackers, kind of more high performance. And I finally got a chance to write a book on sort of health optimization and longevity, which I published in January this year. So since then, and since kind of appearing on Macroaggressions with Charlie Robinson, I've started working with a lot of guys, and it's been an awesome actually experience helping men restore their health and optimize their health. Because last year when I was talking with you guys, I was like, oh, dudes just don't want to be healthy and shit. But it actually turns out there's a lot of really awesome guys out there that want to put in the work, want to get healthier. So this is what I'm doing more of now. I have a new podcast called How to Actually Live Longer. So you can put that into your favorite podcast app. I go on to show you a lot of the concepts that we talk about today. I develop them further on the podcast in a lot of nitty-gritty detail. My book is also called How to Actually Live Longer. And the website is also called How to Actually Live Longer, where you can actually see me show you the science of why keto, low carb, fasting, intermittent fasting, ice baths, all that stuff is shortening your life, aging you prematurely, and it's tanking your tea at the same time.
Controversy, dude.
Yeah.
Controversy, dude. This is, talk about going against the grain there. Wow. Like everything you're talking about is stuff that I've been working on. And now I'm like, did I waste all that time? But I'm open-minded to all of it, Christian. So where do you want to begin? Because everything you've said right here is goes against the health narrative, which seems to go against the overall popular culture, which we have right now is, just eat and do whatever you want and, just get fat. It just seems like, or maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe
it's get fat, then take Ozempic, right? I mean, that's what the popular culture is now.
Yeah.
It's funny. Have you noticed that it used to be that being fat there was a while there where, fat is beautiful. You're whatever size you are, that's how God made you. Then now that they have Ozempic, right? You hear about all these benefits of getting on Ozempic. Like if you get on Ozempic, you're less likely to get diabetes. You're going to live longer. It's just fat is bad is really what it is.
So, okay, go on.
You get what I'm saying though? These benefits that they're saying actually come from Ozempic are just from not being a fat fuck for the
I wasn't actually gonna bring up this topic, but by the way, being fat in this toxic environment with this toxic food supply is probably the next best thing to being actually healthy. Because seriously, because the other option is, instead of synthesizing all that fatty tissue that people are accumulating, the other option is like cancer and straight up degenerative disease. So it is a second best alternative to just the poison people are eating on a daily basis, man, you know. But I'll tell you, again, I know people will be triggered. And here's the thing: if you're coming off of a standard American diet, moving on to keto, carnivore, low carb, intermittent fasting, a lot of those things you will improve. But the problem is that they're still suboptimal. So you will get healthier, but then they're not enough to kind of really get the goal that most people want, which is, you know, health, longevity, optimal peak mental and physical performance. So they're a good stepping stone, but I myself figured out that they are not sufficient, if you know what I mean. But here's, because your audience is very sophisticated, I noticed, especially your seasoned listeners. I saw you like on 800 plus episodes now. Yet, so here's what I kind of tell more sophisticated types. So I was in an Acapulco at a little party there with Charlie Robinson, and there was one lady. She was like a VIP, one of Charlie's sort of angels. There was like a VIP package, and she was like this Canadian lady. She's like, "Oh, I cannot believe all these nuts are so good. Oh, the fasting I'm doing is so good for me." I'm like, "Listen, you're an Acapulco. Let me put it to you this way: if you were a would-be ruler of the earth, what would you want the great unwashed to think? That starving themselves is gonna lead them to better health? Wouldn't that be like the optimal thing, when we all think, dude, if I starve myself for 10 days, I'm gonna live longer because I'm gonna upregulate autophagy? Like, isn't that what you would do, right?
No, I will say, I mean, one of the guys that I follow most closely, Peter Attia, was the big, you know, Dr. Peter Attia, right? He was an evangelist for this stuff, and he's completely done a 180 on fasting. He's come around to saying that the benefits are purely from caloric restriction, not from any kind of extended period of, you know, restricting your eating window. So yeah, hey man,
yeah. And Peter Attia, he lost something like 20 pounds of lean mass doing fasting, because he was doing the sort of the body scans, the MRI, not the MRI, but you know, the scans, the DEXA scans. Yeah. So he lost a bunch of lean mass. He said he went from 9 to like 14% body fat, so like a few percentage points of fat. Here's the thing: the reason that happened to him, even though he's eating well and he's exercising, is because fasting, anything that stresses you, lowers your metabolism, because that's what the body does in response to a stressor, whether that's psychological, a lot of, you know, work, travel, your business, whether that's fasting, whether that's, you know, relationships, whether that's keto. All of these things raise cortisol, and when you understand what elevated cortisol does to your body on a chronic basis, if you're a logical, smart person, you will then logically say, I need to do things that lower my cortisol. Not, I shouldn't be going out of my way to increase my cortisol, right? Especially like, dude, Sam, I saw you on Instagram. I think you were doing a live, so I just kind of tuned in for a while, and you were talking about like you're doing 1 meal a day. I'm like, I was there in the chat. I was like, no, don't do it, don't do it. You're 50 years old, dude.
Yeah, and don't say that out loud. Yeah, no, totally. I am.
Sorry, I thought people knew.
No. I'm 51. I'm joking. Go on.
Yeah, I know. I know. Yeah, but no, you look amazing for 51.
Thank
but here's
you.
the thing: you wanna continue to kick ass. This is a big reason why these things are becoming mainstream. Sort of, doctors are recommending keto, low carb. They're recommending intermittent fasting, even to like children now. It is straight up, and I have an episode on one of my podcasts. It's called Low Carb Diet, a Depopulation Tool, because genuinely, if you look at the fertility rates of younger people now, guys and girls, they're like one in two is like infertile almost. And if you look at what a high cortisol does, what a low carb diet does, it raises your cortisol. And a high cortisol, what that does is it interferes with testicular function, because the testes, some of the cells run on glucose, the sperm run on fructose, the ovaries need glucose. And when you lower the carbohydrates in your diet, the body starts to shut down nice to have functions, and your immediate survival precedes, you know, libido, higher cognitive function, fertility, these things. And this, I believe, is such a again, for the listeners, because you're sophisticated, you have to understand these agendas are so intricately sort of weaved into the societal psyche that it's very difficult when you grow up with something, or where something actually makes you feel better after a few months of doing it. It's very difficult to accept that this is actually going to shorten your life in the end.
So how many meals are we talking a day? If it's not one, it wasn't three. When it was breakfast, lunch, and dinner is too much. Sam, one's too little. What are we? Two?
I think
On the other number between 1 and 3.
Yeah.
so. The way I teach my clients is, so when you eat a meal, right? You eat the meal. The next couple of hours, you're kind of storing the meal. You're breaking it down, digesting it, and you're topping up your liver with glucose or glycogen, right? So 3 hours, 4, 5 hours later, you are now depleting that stored glucose. And as that liver glycogen depletes, like through the night, let's say like 2, 3 a.m., let's say you went to bed at a normal hour, 2, 3 a.m., you're starting to deplete that liver glycogen. At that point, that's when the cortisol, the stress hormones, begin to gently start rising. And what I tell my clients, for longevity or to restore your health, if you have a health issue, you don't want that cortisol to start going higher, right? So every 4 or 5 hours for a weaker person or a less healthy or an older person is a good cadence, right? So you start the day with a little bit of a top up, and then every 3, 4 hours you have, like if you're younger, if you're like in your 30s, you can go all day. You don't feel the stress hormones degenerating you. But when you get older, and I'm sure you guys know, if you're like, I don't know how you felt, but actually, how did you feel not eating all day and having one meal a day, Sam? Just out of curiosity.
So how do I feel? I do feel anxious. Like
Okay,
I'm
there you
just
go.
looking at the clock until the
That's
window.
the cortisol. That's
I'm
the
working on a
adrenaline.
joke right now about how, like, when I'll fast, and then when my window comes in, I just become a garbage can, and I'm just like throwing everything in my mouth that I can, because my window's open. I can just do it, right? So
Yeah.
then I'm like, why didn't I gain weight? It's like, well, because you had Thanksgiving Day dinner and birthday cake and all that stuff all at one time. And so I get that. I totally get that. And here's the only thing that makes me go, there could be, because I have reservations about what you're saying, because people that I really like say a lot of the opposite, but in my life that's pretty much the norm, right? Like whatever I believe, everybody else says the opposite to that. So I'm open-minded to all of it. The one thing I notice, and maybe I'm wrong, is that all these diets that everybody tends to do forever, or whatever eating system they adopt, it never lasts forever, right? It just ends up like this phase in their life where they just go through this thing, and they like, okay, I'm fasting for this long, or I'm doing this diet. And then at some point it just ends, and then they go back to their old way, and their body just reverts to what it was. So that kind of makes me think that maybe there is something to what you're saying, that maybe these systems aren't optimal for us because we tend not to maintain them for a long time.
Yeah. And the reason that happens is, I like I said, I have on my podcast, on my website, How to Actually Live Longer, I go through the studies, and the one study on intermittent fasting, so 16/8, right, which is kind of a common format. So after 2 weeks, the participants already, their resting energy expenditure was lowered by a median of 59 calories per day. What does that mean? That means so they're doing 2 weeks of intermittent fasting, 16/8. At that point, all things being equal, if the metabolic rate stays the same and the calories stay the same, over the next year, they're going to gain over 6 pounds of fat, 21,000 plus calories.
What?
That's how, so in 2 weeks, you're, without reducing calories, by the way, they didn't reduce protein or calories. And the same thing happens on a keto diet. Within 4 days, you're already, the thyroid hormones are lowering, the stress hormones are increasing. Similarly, with intermittent fasting, I can show you 3 or 4 studies where at the 2-month mark, the guy's testosterone had dropped by 20 to 25%. And but this is actually very well known. Even if you take a dude and you inject him with like hydrocortisone, which is like synthetic cortisol, immediately the testosterone lowers. So cortisol and testosterone have a sort of they're oppositional to each other. So anything that stresses you out chronically is going to lower your T. That's why Peter Attia, I don't know if you heard the episode, Johnny, when he was interviewed by Derek from More Plates, More Dates, but he was
Yes.
talking about his testosterone, Peter Attia's testosterone being like 320, 330, 350. That is freaking preposterous, bro. Like, you're supposed to be, like a guy like that, he should have a pretty much higher testosterone. That's almost the bottom of the range for Americans. Like 250 is the bottom of the range. That is really bad. I'm sure there's grandpas out there with like double the testosterone. So that is what a lot of the intermittent fasting and the low carb stuff does, because it raises your cortisol, whether you feel it or not. That is having a degenerative effect on your body. That's what cortisol does.
Now, you said that they kept the calorie intake equal across those two in that study. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, isn't most of the benefit they think now probably of fasting the caloric deficit, running a caloric deficit? Wouldn't you want to if you were fasting?
I'm glad you asked. There was another study. It was a big study in the University of California, San Francisco. The paper was published in JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA Internal Medicine, bro. And they found, so the conclusion of that study was that intermittent fasting in the absence of other interventions is not more effective than eating throughout the day, which means if you intermittent fast, and that group that intermittent fasted, they lost some weight, but 65% of that was lean mass, right? And so the conclusion, and the doctor that ran it, he stopped recommending it to his patients. He stopped intermittent fasting. There was a MSNBC or some other big article about that. So the people, they basically found that unless you cut calories or unless you do exercise, intermittent fasting is actually not more effective. So you have to cut the calories. But here's the thing. If you cut the calories, then your metabolism lowers. And then if you ever go back on the previous calories, you're just gonna regain that weight and then some. This is I call it painting yourself into a metabolic corner. I had one client last year. Some days he was eating 900 calories and he wasn't losing any weight. And he was like 220-pound guy. This is where a lot of people are headed following these regimes, right? So, dude.
So when you say depopulation, that means that this is purposeful, that's being done on. Is that your conclusion, that the PSYOP has entered the health space on purpose to lower the population, to stop us from having children?
I believe this is one of the multi-pronged depopulation approach, because here's how you know it is. When I had one client, her granddaughter, 16 years of age, she was visibly hypothyroid on the blood work, right? And I was helping her out, and she told me that she's 16 years of age, her doctor here in Portugal dude. So remember, things come later to out of the US, the doctor told her to do intermittent fasting. So doctors have been if doctors are recommending it, you better believe that those are directives coming from their boards, those associations, that's coming from higher. So it's not like it was designed to do for that means, but when they figure out that, oh, this actually is helpful, then it can be boosted, it can be amplified with social media, with the algorithm, because that's a study. It's not actually mentioned in the Wikipedia page on, at least when I accessed it in November last year, it wasn't mentioned in the Wikipedia page about fasting. So the narrative on Wikipedia, where the masses go, is that intermittent fasting is good. And by the way, about the caloric restriction, I write about that in the book. So the thing about caloric restriction is a lot of that research, Johnny, is done in rats and kind of animals, right? And what they do is they have a standard lab diet, which is very similar for all the animals, from rats to even to primates. So fish meal, ground up sort of like soybeans, and just, it's a disgusting concoction of glorified toxic slop. And then they feed that to the animals, and then they have a control group that eats less of the poison, and then they allow the other group to eat ad libitum, so they eat as much as they want to get fat, become insulin resistant, develop a bunch of health problems. And then they conclude that the group that ate less poison did better. And it's like, yeah, if you really handicap the studies that way, it does show that fasting, intermittent fasting, skipping meals and stuff like that is good. But when they did it with monkeys, there was a couple of big trials with rhesus monkeys, and the one where they ate a more natural diet, the difference wasn't really significant in the lifespan. And then the other one where there was an increase in lifespan in the calorie reduction group, they were eating this kind of horrific sort of, like I said, fish meal, like ground up fish heads. It's just disgusting, dude. And by the way, in that study, the monkey that lived the longest was in the ad libitum group. So it wasn't even like the calorie restriction. It lived to 40 years. It was diabetic and it was on insulin and it lived the freaking longest. It wasn't even on a calorie restriction. So the science is a shit show. So when they tell you the science shows calorie restriction XYZ, you can tell them, all that science, you can't even wipe your ass with it because it's, it's worthless. So
Well, you mentioned earlier, you mentioned, would you say caloric restriction has benefits at all aside from fasting?
only if you're on the standard American diet and you're truly eating like really like maybe 60, 70, 80 grams of seed oils per day, which many people are nowadays. If like one meal, you could get 30, 40 grams, So at that point, eating less is beneficial. But what's actually more beneficial is figuring out roughly what a person needs. Let's say they need 2,500 calories, and then just eating meat. And I'm not saying don't like eat a ton of carbs or whatever. I'm not saying go the other extreme. Just eat a little bit of carbs, a little bit of healthy fats, a little bit of protein, and that person will do a hell of a lot better than going on diets and doing various other interventions.
What if they're carrying around extra fat? They need to be a healthy person. They would need to lose some weight. What would be the best way to do that?
So this is something else I write about in the book. So the problem when you gain weight is you gain a lot of that in polyunsaturated fats, right? And the fat is also a storage site for a lot of the toxins in the persistent organic pollutants that kind of make it up the food chain through the fatty tissue of animals. BCPs and whatever else. So when you start losing a lot of weight quickly, you're liberating this stuff very quickly, and that can overwhelm your detoxification capacities. And the polyunsaturated fats will actually damage endothelial, sort of blood vessels, organs. So it's actually, the ideal thing is if you're overweight is to take your damn time and actually do detox protocols, support your liver first. I know it's not sexy. I know people hate that, the slow way to do it, but that is actually the right way to do it because they've done research where people that have lost a lot of weight, they actually have a lower life expectancy. They have a higher all-cause mortality rate. And there was actually Harvard alumni in one of those studies that they analyzed. So people that gained a lot of weight or lost a lot of weight or had big weight fluctuations, they did the worst. And the people that actually had the highest the best outcomes is the people that gained a little bit of weight as they age, because again, this sequesters a lot of toxins in the environment that would otherwise attack your organs, your brain. And so it is, again, like I said earlier, being fat, especially in this toxic environment in the USA, in the big cities, is a protective mechanism for a lot of people. So you cannot, something that developed over 10, 20 years, you cannot in a year expect to safely get that off of you.
About all that stuff.
Yeah,
so yeah, I mean, I think it's part. So let's get into this. I have a good friend of mine. He's a jiu-jitsu black belt. He is constantly begging me to get into an ice bath and do.
Oh, is he a flat earther too?
Yeah, well, yeah. No, he's actually hates flat earthers.
Okay.
He actually hates flat earthers. No, this isn't Eddie Bravo. Okay. This is a black belt under Eddie Bravo. Though, a good friend of mine I've known for probably 30 years almost now. He constantly wants me to do a ice bath. What is your thoughts on ice bath?
I would tell him to slap him, but then now that he's a BJJ black belt, I'd say
yeah, he will F me up.
Politely decline. So this is a very good question. And I want to tell you guys out there, unless you're an athlete, competitive athlete, or you have a lot of like aspirations at an amateur level, there's absolutely no need to do ice baths, because the reason athletes like MMA fighters and whatever do it, you could say that there's rationale. They're getting in the ice bath to lower inflammation. But remember, XG, that things lowering inflammation by suppressing the immune system is suboptimal. So stress, i.e., activating the sympathetic nervous system or the fight or flight nervous system, right? Stress will suppress the immune system. So when you dunk yourself in the ice bath, first thing that rises is your adrenaline, noradrenaline, norepinephrine, epinephrine, and then cortisol soon after. So that the stress of that downregulates the immune system, so you have less inflammation. But so again, if you're an athlete, you got to train twice a day, whatever else. Sure, you're taking a hit, but potentially maybe for a big paycheck to entertain all of us. So there's the greater good there. But if you're just a regular Joe, especially if you're like 40 plus, like why would you want to do anything that spikes your cortisol and rate? Like, yeah, okay, it wakes you up in the morning, but you're being woken up by fucking stress hormones and cortisol and adrenaline. So what I would do is I would tell you, if you want to lower inflammation, what I told to XG, get some willow bark extract, right? Because it's more powerful than just willow bark. Take 2 to 4 of those, and that's like, again, like nature's aspirin, and that actually, like, you feel less pain, you feel less inflamed. That is how you do it. That's how people have been doing it for like thousands of years. This ice bath stuff is, again, another fad that is I believe algorithmically being sort of bubbled up to the surface, because the algorithm, maybe I'm a conspiracy theorist here, the algorithm is like, oh, harmful, let's push that up. Oh, degenerate, whatever, push it up. Oh, sex stuff to frustrate young men, to make them hate their body. Women, oh, make them want to eat less, make them feel fat, bubble that up. So this is just another one of those things that, again, and we get a short-term benefit of lowered inflammation. You have more energy because of the stress hormones, and then we conflate that as a beneficial intervention. And this is where the insidiousness of these things lies. You do get some benefit, like the Wim Hof breathing, bro. That's another thing that is actually harmful because it raises your adrenaline, and that adrenaline suppresses your immune system. So when they did the study and they injected the guys with the endotoxin, they didn't get the fever and the sort of the sickness behavior, because they couldn't muster up the immune response, because the stress hormones had suppressed their immune system. But you know what? Over a long enough timeline, that is how cancer develops. So great way to feed the cancer industry in a very sort of subtle way while people are still young. Let it start there, weaken them there, and then
so crazy,
as the time comes, we can monetize those fuckers.
Wow, dude.
Yeah.
So where do we go to find what you believe is the correct way to eat and live?
howtoactuallylivelonger.com, and podcast player, How to Actually Live Longer, or look for my name. I have another podcast, Connecting Minds. There's more interviews and stuff. Yeah, man, like, it's this, like, I know that these kinds of episodes probably don't do the best in terms of viewership, but it's sort of frustrating, because this is one of the most important topics that you have ever covered. I not because I'm here or whatever, the information itself, no ego here, right? It's because a lot of us out there, myself included, we're duped. I was doing these things as well, and it turns out that we're just harming ourselves in a different way. It's like switching one poison for another poison. So it's important, man. We have to become educated the way, like back in the day, guys, you'd buy a car, you'd learn how to like fix the car if it broke down and stuff, or your bike. We need to be like that with our bodies, because this is the most important vehicle we have. If we don't learn how to fix this, and we spend our time on other things that are lower priority, we're invariably gonna like be caught in somebody's net out there. There's a lot of nets that are gonna catch us, so yeah.
What about fitness training, cardio versus weight training? Could you talk briefly about that? Are there any major misconceptions about the benefits of training with weight?
Oh my God. And like, have one client. She told me like a couple of weeks ago, or a couple of months ago, maybe. It's like, so now the next thing I want to do is I want to raise my VO2 max. And then she started continuing, and I'm like, stop.
Yeah.
Why? She's like, that's a good question. And Peter Attia talks about zone 2 and VO2 max. Like VO2 max is basically a measure of how much stress a person has put themselves to endure, and now they're adapted to a higher level of stress. So because my book is on longevity, I want to help people resolve their health problems and optimize their longevity. I absolutely do not recommend any kind of endurance exercise, because I can even give you like not just animal research, but also some human research that shows that it ages the cardiovascular system, right? It can contribute to the calcification. This it's a degenerative activity, right?
So can I ask you, but it does correlate in studies with longevity, right? But are you suggesting that it's more genetic? People that are just genetically have higher VO2 maxes are going to live longer?
So it's another difficult topic, because a lot of the research is the kind of I don't think the research is truly painting the full picture. It's like we're looking at a tiny little part of the picture, right? The fact is, so here's the way I kind of describe it to clients sometimes. If you're naturally strong, great. If you're naturally fit, naturally lean, or you have a naturally high VO2 max, that's great. But if you have, let's say, like a bodybuilder or endurance athlete, or some like someone that becomes super lean for a competition, or very strong because they lifted a lot of weights, if you had to put yourself through a lot of stress to get to that VO2 max or level of leanness or level of strength, that means you endured a lot of stress. And if you stop, and then over the next, let's say, 2 to 12 months, if you kind of regress to a baseline that was way lower, so you lost a lot of those gains, it means that to maintain that VO2 max, strength, leanness, whatever else, you were enduring a lot of stress. And that inherently, that stress is what actually ages us, because you will see, if you look in the research, just injecting animals with cortisol starts to create this aging sort of phenotype. People with lower cortisol level look younger. They're evaluated as younger. Twin studies where the younger a twin looked, the more likely that the older looking twin would die sooner. And the bigger the age gap, the sort of the more likely that person would die. So this is my point. So if you're not pushing yourself too much, too often, you can do any kind of exercise, right? Anything. But if you're doing it to reach a certain level, and it takes, let's say 6 hours of training a week to maintain those gains, let's say muscle mass, or again, endurance, fitness level to run a marathon in whatever, 2.5 hours. If it takes like multiple hours per week to maintain it, you are just, you're like adding stress to your system, which is actually not going to be adding to your longevity. I hope that kind of makes sense.
So would you say David Goggins isn't going to live too long?
No, and I feel sorry for guys like that. I really do, man. I saw some show. There was one I think he was Scandinavian triathlete, and he was training for the Olympics in the summer, and he was like he either had a world record, or he was gonna break a world record. He was training twice a day, doing the ice baths, and then I looked at the guy, and then when they told me he was 27, I was like, holy mother of God, this guy looked like 45. So this is what these guys are doing. They're aging themselves internally, but eventually it will manifest externally. And with a lot of these guys, like the guy Jim Fix that popularized running, and he died at the age of like 52, man. And then they're saying, oh, he had a heart issue. Blah, blah, blah. No, dude, he was pounding the pavement every day. That destroys your health. Now, to make sure people don't think like I'm a lazy slob, I like tennis, paddle. I used to do Thai boxing. So lifting weights. The point is, again, how much stress are you putting on your system? If it takes you like days to recover after a session, you're going too hard. That's all I'm saying. Don't go too hard. But what I do is, when I go hard, like I went to this paddle thing, which is like tennis, like racquetball. I went for a
pickleball. Is that
it's called paddle.
Okay.
It's big in Portugal, but I went for a lesson with like a very good coach last week, and I was like 4 days, I was dying, dude. So I'm like, I took that hit, but at the same time I was taking like 20 supplements a day, and today I'm super recovered. So the point is, if you're gonna put yourself through that stress of whatever conditioning, exercise, whatever, you gotta meet yourself where you're at, especially the older you are. So like I take a bunch of stuff that lowers my cortisol, like vitamins that lower inflammation, all of that stuff constantly. Protein, everything is dialed in, dude. So that's all I'm saying is, if you're gonna push yourself, don't just push yourself in the gym, but make sure all your ducks are in a row: nutrition, rest, sleep, all that good stuff. That's all I'm saying. You gotta, don't be super one-dimensional like a lot of guys, like just getting pumped. And then like my barber, I'm sorry, don't want to throw my barber under the bus, but the guy's like 10 years younger than me. He looks my age because like he has these big muscles, but like he's already, like he's in his 20s, he's already wrinkled because he's pushing himself so hard to look huge and jacked and shredded, but he's not meeting the stress where it's at nutritionally. And I'm always like telling him, you gotta do more, you gotta do more. But you know, you can't, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't, you know, make him drink.
So there's been this a lot of content made about how Gen Z is looking so much older.
Yeah.
They're just like, they're showing pictures of these girls that are like 22, 23, and they're asking like plastic surgeons like what age they are, and they're putting them at 38, 39, 40. I know this is like out of nowhere, but do you have any thoughts on like why Generation Z is aging so much quicker than everybody before them?
Well, it's again this sort of generational warfare where our parents were weakened, so we were our whole start in life, we were weaker to begin with. Like I have my my neighbor below me, this French dude, he's 75. When they moved in under us, he painted their house inside, or their apartment inside and out, and then he proceeded to live in there after he painted it, dude. He had the windows open during the day, but he lived in the house he painted. And then his wife, he's like, who's maybe closer to 80, she came in, they were like living, and I was going up and down the corridor, and just the smell there, I was like dry heaving, and like I would grab my daughter like a football, and I'd run up the stairs to make sure she's not exposed to that for more than a few seconds. And these guys just living there, and then they're getting up in the morning, they're on their bikes in their 70s. And okay, the lady's like very wrinkled up and stuff, but the point is that that older generation, they're resilient as hell because they ate more real food, more nutritional density, less toxins, less EMS. So these younger kids now, I really feel sorry for them. Why do you think I'm so passionate about helping you with your kids, and like with my kid, her diet? Because unless we truly go out of our way to protect them and to teach them how to survive and thrive in the world, they're just going to be like all these other people. And like uh these kids being born now, in at least in the States, their life expectancy is probably gonna be lower than their parents now, man. And it's all got to do with us not adapting to the environment sufficiently. That's why I do the work I do.